neighborhood, yeah, to try and activate and energize like neighborhood dynamic. And this fellow Kiran, who's also part of the bioregional platform there, he's in touch with someone who's retired, and he was an ER emergency doctor. So he's in his late 70s, I believe, and he has a vision of was it 1 million neighborhoods activated?
A bunch, yeah, like a neighborhood.
But the idea is to get neighborhoods. Right. And I think that's great. If we can really have this dynamic of people coming together with a certain awareness and consciousness about what do we do for our neighborhood, for ecological thrivability. Annie, for example, in her area, insurance companies are threatening to suspend their policies because potential increased risk of fires. I mean, that's pathetic that they would do that, but that in itself should bring neighbors together. Anyway, so it's all promising.
I have to ask, what is TCQ?
It's the Texas Commission of Environment Protection.
Yeah.
Texas, yeah, environmental quality. It's air monitoring.
Yeah. Texas Commission for Environment Quality.
Yeah, and water quality, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
And well, just to answer to respond to your note in the chat there, I actually got a private audience with John Neerman last week, actually, as it turned out.
Who's that? John Neerman?
He's the chair of
wow.
the commission. I won't tell you the whole story here on this Zoom link, call, but we were looking at making public comments, because once a month you can go in and submit a 3-minute comment, and we recognized that only 3 comments had been made all year. So we said, well, we need to step that up, because this is an opportunity to speak to the 3-person commission that makes the final decisions. Because just like this ammonia plant hearing that Jude and I attended, those guys are not there. So, what gives? And so a group of us from the coast started this effort, and me and another gal were going to be in person again this month. Well, first off, they bumped it up 2 weeks. Second off, they changed the day, and we still said we still signed up, and we still had 2 people that were going to submit an auditory comment just online, which you can do that as well. So we had 4 of us signed up. Well, they blew first off, the link didn't work that morning. They couldn't get the link to work. And then they bumped the agenda up so much. We were supposed to be item 24. Okay. Autumn and I were 20 minutes late. They had blown through the whole agenda.
Yeah.
And so we walk in, but I think it was all orchestrated well, because we walk in, and unlike the previous time when Jude and I were there, when the commission does their whole agenda, took an hour and a half, same thing, and they step out into a side room, they were in the room milling around, or John Neerman was for sure. And I mean, I caught his eye immediately, and he looked directly at me. He knew who we were, and and so Autumn and I sat down. He spoke with a few people that were still in there, and then he came right over to us. He never said, I'm speaking off record. He never said, don't quote me on this. But he said, our hands are tied in saying no to these permits. It's the Texas legislature. And he said, he really sees things going more in our favor with this new session coming up this spring. I don't know. But he said that they cannot, because what I plan to speak about, because he said, I'll be happy to hear your comments, and And so what I wanted to speak about was that they are not present at these local meetings to really hear people's energy and their concerns. And so I got the first sentence out of my mouth, and he says, and that's exactly where we need to be, because we need to be hearing people and, understanding what's going on the ground, but we're not allowed to do that because the permit applicant can come back later if we deny it and say that we were unfairly swayed by these other issues that we would have picked up on at these hearings. So
I've got a number of criticisms in regards to like our state policy approach. And the first one is fundamental, and that is it separates interests. And so you have a body here that cares about water quality. You have a different body over here that cares about water supply. You have a different body that cares about flood water, and then a different body that deals with like fire risk. It's insane. And so we have these, like we have infrastructure that has a single purpose. And that is an excellent kind of counterpoint to traditional ecological knowledge-based infrastructure and or like ancestral infrastructure examples, which always perform multiple functions, like the quinat and the thermal regulation of buildings. The second criticism is that these institutional bodies are captive to industry, and I think that's like most evident in like the Texas Railroad Commission. But it's also like our groundwater conservation districts who like there's great people that are on the board of our groundwater conservation districts. Like I'm not trying to like talk shit on the participants, but they're they have very minimal agency themselves. And so like these roles are created under the law, the roles are given certain authorities, and like the whole thing, the intent is to make it look like it's working, to get the people to sit down and shut up so that the industrial development can continue. And then the politician can also say, well, we're doing our best. Here's all this work and all this money that we're spending.
Exactly.
But it's terribly frustrating. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, would you agree with John Neerman's assessment that what we need is change to come through the legislature to change the way these, I mean, they're tied their hands?
If there was somebody that was like paying me to engage with the legislature, I would engage, and I might be optimistic. But no, I really think like, in fact, one of the things that draws me to the design school is Joe can acknowledge that like the system's fucked, and there is no fixing it. And in fact, what our work needs to be is like building alternative tools of coordination.
Be the change we wish to see. That's what I've been thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is really appealing to certain. There's just more resources than I anticipated once you kind of go radical in this direction. It is challenging though. It challenges like these institutional bodies like TEK, for example, right? Like they have authority over this subject. It is also challenging to private property owners and folks that have significant investments in, well, fossil fuel reservoirs, for example. And so we shouldn't be surprised when we encounter moneyed opposition sooner than would arise naturally. Yes. Cool. Yeah, so I'm Will. Y'all know who I am, I think, mostly, but I guess I'll go ahead and give the spiel. So yeah, I'm an attorney. I live in Amarillo, Texas. I'm very privileged to be like place-based. I've got family here. My wife's got family. We've got deep ties to this part of the world, and it's on the Southern High Plains. It's semi-arid. It is complex and beautiful and awesome, but it's nearly all privately owned, as is the case across most of the Texas landscape. There's been a like near total disconnect between the people that lived here up until mid 1800s and the people that live here now, and there's almost like no indigenous land holdings of significance within hundreds of miles. So like whenever I started to learn about traditional ecological knowledge, it was just kind of like such an alien thing. And I learned about it in an IP context, like intellectual property, in the sense that Bayer or Monsanto, for example, can't get a series of patents on some bean that has healing powers if those healing powers are known to a community and a part of their traditional ecologic knowledge
Mm.
vault. It is a way of acknowledging like a cultural, really like proprietary rights over knowledge. The problem is traditional ecological knowledge systems are not expressed in a clear scientific Western mode of thought. And so like they're inherently place-based in the sense that, you know, you might want to align some feature, you know, so that it faces the goddess being, you know, like a mountaintop over there or whatever. It's just not easily known to the outsider. And the holders of the traditional ecological knowledge should not be expected to volunteer this information. Like, oh, hey, this is what it means and this is why. Because if they did that, they're kind of, you know, giving away the secrets, but without doing it, they can't get protections. It's just kind of messed up. But anyway, I find it super fascinating. And I explore some of the Canadian River breaks, like seeing ruins or artifacts, and just can't help but like try to imagine what was here before. There's a lot of early Anglo reports, and they talk about how like the people that, well, they're starving and they're dying of thirst as they cross the plains. Whenever they find a village and find the riparian bottoms, it's like, oh, God has so blessed these savage people. I mean, they've got like orchards, and it's like Italy or something. They've got these vineyards, and it's all natural, and it's all wonderful. But what like clearly what they were encountering was cultivation and indigenous like agroecology practices. And in fact, I think the entire landscape was to some degree cultivated. So my interest is kind of like a process of like rediscovery, and the disconnected cultural ties from before to now are tragic, and like it's a huge problem for us, and it's an opportunity in a sense. And so we can learn like what examples are out there in climates and landscapes that are similar to this one, and how might we apply those here, and how might we kind of like again rediscover and re-engage in these local place-based knowledge systems. And so yeah, that's kind of led me to here. And I am like, I mean, I've read a lot about it, I've looked up a lot, but I guess my knowledge is weird. But anyway, that's longer than I meant to go. Yeah, I'm Will, and I do, Jude, it is incredibly nice to meet you. I have yes, heard of you a lot, and this is awesome. And so anyway, I'll pass it on to Beans, and then Annie and Jude, unless I don't know, try to keep it short, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Will.
Oh, I'm Beans. You all know me. I live in the mountains and I'm moving to the desert. And so there's my interest in dryland technology is like on purpose, I'm choosing to move to where there is no water and choosing to not dig a well and only work with rainwater and floodwater harvesting. That's like my main goal. And while at first it's on 1 acre, the goal is 7,000 acres at first and then 25,000 acres. And then I'm working with, right now I'm in discussion with some people in New Mexico about their 100,000 acre lease surrounding the land that I bought property on. So there's BLM land on 3 sides of that like basin, and it's 100,000 acres of just degraded grazing land. So the opportunity to get a conservation lease out there or work with the landowner somewhere where I can affect enough acreage that in theory you can change the weather. That's really my goal is weather modification.
Mhm.
And you know, that's it. So that's why. Oh, and building cheap, sustainable housing for everybody on the planet, because affordable house shouldn't cost $300,000 because that's ridiculous. You should not be a slave to wages for your entire life to be able to live. I think that's part of bioregionalism, which is like if we build a house bioregionally appropriate in the desert, it's going to be made out of mud and dirt and minimal amount of wood, right? And so the cost, like the estimated cost to build my house is like including a set of plans is 10 grand. So it's like how much do I need to sell that house for them to break even? Basically nothing. So there's no need to build a house for 10 grand and sell it for $100,000 to somebody, you know? I don't know how to figure that out, but somehow I'm trying to tank the real estate market on purpose. And so obviously my beliefs are purely anarchistic and lean heavily towards solar punk and bioregionalism. And like you guys, I don't believe legislature will do anything. So as I've been talking to Marie, we just say, we're already on the plane crashing it, right? So like we just need to build the life rafts, right? We need to be the life rafts for when it crashes and everybody's ready. Like, and we're there to be like, all right, come on, we already figured this out. It might suck briefly, but we can survive together. So anyway, that's it for me. I'm shooting it out to, I think it was Annie next on Will's list. I'm not sure.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. Levity. So I'm in a neighborhood for the last 30 years where we're all on 1.5 acre properties with no restrictions. And some people are trying to do a carpet lawn, sort of. I mean, ish. You really can't do it because we're on rock in Caliche. And we have a lovely what do you call it, like stream that runs between in the middle of our neighborhood, and it's awesome when it rains. And there are all kinds of streamlets that run through the neighborhood, and that's what the neighbor down the street that Jude met the other day, young guy, he's out there and he's got one of these little streamlets that runs right down his hill, and he's skinning the grass off of his ditch because he thinks that will help it, and so I was talking to him about the native grasses and pointing them out to him, and you could just see he was just so hungry and so happy for that kind of knowledge. And so I've been managing this property, my friend and I have, for 30 years. That we're like a pocket prairie. We removed the juniper and all of that, and then I got to participate. You probably saw my posts, but I got to participate in some revitalization of land 8 miles west of here. So if anything, even hotter and drier than we have it here. And just seeing those techniques of using the juniper branches, which anyway, there's just so much with the junipers, and the oaks are just so dried out right now and so brittle and so many of them are broken in the ice storms and everything else that's been going on. So you can see the process of desertification going on right now. And so Beans, like when you talk about changing the weather, yeah, I've read about that, and I mean, there are a lot of people out here that not just in my small neighborhood, but a lot of people that are interested in revitalization. Not everyone, but it's getting people's attention, this business of, well, we're either going to cancel your insurance or double it, so that you can have fire insurance. But that's kind of getting some people's attention that wouldn't normally. But I think a lot of people are really interested to begin with. They wouldn't be living in this area if they weren't. So I'm super excited to be a part of this group. And yeah.
I guess I'll, just for the record, I'll say a little bit to situate myself. Now, Annie did not drill down from Texas to the planet mantle down through to get to the Seychelles in the Indian Ocean, which is where I'm originally from. I moved to Quebec in September '88 with my family. I've been part there of, Seychelles became independent from Britain in 1976, and then there was a coup d'etat, and then all that great idealism about building a fair society. But I've seen how power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, which led to my bailing out end of '88. Even if I could have had good positions, I was traveling, I was in international relations, going to the UN and all over anyway. But in Quebec, then we started afresh. So we had to integrate the French educational system with the 3 girls, and we had a 4th while we were here. And now everyone's grown up. And Annie and I met through the Thierry Desjardins Facebook group. Thierry Desjardins is an author. Spas was exiled from France to New York. He was a Jesuit paleontologist and all that. But he was ahead of his time and talked about evolution, and the church was not happy with that. Anyway, what the bottom line is that Teilhard's quote of harnessing the energies of love for, well, he said for God, we're saying for divine co-creation. We are all part of the consciousness of the universe in evolution. So we believe that, and this is what brings Annie and I to collaborate, to be exchanging over 4 years since end of 2020. And over the last year, we've met several times, both in, she made the courageous move to fly out in July last year. So from there, then I went over, and then we've spent some time in Australia together and again. So it's really, in one sentence, we believe in engaging love for co-creative purpose, for personal flourishment, but also for the common good. So that's what is motivating us. And we're moving forward, trusting the emerging coherence as we synergize sincerely. So that's where we are. And so far, it seems that the action will be happening in Texas, because she doesn't speak French, while I speak English, and I can better move around in Texas. So that's the...
I just wanted to say, I agree with you, Annie. Back to you real quick about the neighborhood thing too. And then obviously Jude doing everything with love by default means we'll probably be doing hopefully the right thing. You know, hopefully. I don't know. There's a lot of examples in the other way, but I agree though. And the thing, Annie, about starting in the neighborhood level is that that's where we used to be, right? Like, you know, back in the maybe the idealized version of maybe the past of America that I wasn't around for, when there were neighborhood associations and things like even the neighborhood watch, where they just got together to provide basic security. At least that was like a neighborhood community thing that kind of even got lost now, which I find crazy. And what I found interesting about the ranchettes in New Mexico, they have a neighborhood association too already out there. So even though there's nobody there, they do have a community group going. So, you know, and Will, I work, you know, obviously Will is doing the Ogallala work, and I'm in discussions with some people that are doing the work with him. And what I find funny is their disconnect, which they find to be a disconnect between, say, Will and myself, which is their focus is on pure number of acreage restored, right? And so they're focusing on these big acreages, which is important, right? Because obviously the more acreage, the better. But if you're only affecting one rancher's piece of property where no one's going to see it, where you're only benefiting that rancher, right? Where his cows will be better, where maybe, sure, we're regenerating the land and increasing organic matter, but how much effect beyond just regenerating, say, some major acreages does that have? Where would the effect go out into society or culture or anywhere else to say, look, we did all this work on this one guy's private ranch that he raises all these cows on and makes tons of money on, and the government supplements him and all this kind of stuff. But how does that translate, that big acreage work translate into the changing of people's minds, who mainly will never see that work, never directly interact with that work, never even maybe know that work went on? That's where a lot of the guys I see in Will's group who are doing the big regen work don't see the value of the neighborhood work. They just see like, who's going to adopt this practice and this kind of stuff. But I mean, we can say the same thing about the ranchers. Like, why would they adopt this practice also if it just costs them extra money? Anyway, I'm going to shut up now. Thank you.
That is a huge dynamic, and I think it is one that is also probably encountered often by Jude and Annie, and that is like, we have these large private landowners, and they may want to do something cool, and they may even like let you be a part of it, which is awesome. But like, how regenerative can it be if the community is still disconnected from the landscape that sustains the community? And so it is this like blending of scales, right? And so like regeneration is necessary at the local scale. It's less necessary like at the neighborhood, and then the infrastructure scale, and then landscape scale, and then bioregional scale. And we can't really have one without the other. Of course, whenever we don't have any of that right now, it's kind of like a chicken and the egg in the sense of like, how do individual projects become a movement, even though like the folks in the GTB don't like movement. We got to call it something. I don't know. So I think that and that in terms of like intent for this course, and I'm glad to have a small group, although I anticipated a few more than this, and I think we will have some more next Wednesday. So we'll get the word out a little bit. But like it's not a dry or academic examination of traditional ecologic knowledge-based systems. It's meant to be practical, and so like this whole, as we engage in these discussions, like how can we like what lessons can we take and apply in our own lives to our own projects, and make it relevant to us. And I suggest, even though we don't deal with a lot of high mountain landscapes in the state of Texas, for example, the work that is being done in high mountain landscapes still relevant. Like there's still lessons that we can take away and draw, etc. Cool. So yeah, Beans has prepared some beautiful slides, and I would ask him, or actually I can get it started.
Yeah, my problem is I'm on solar power, and we're at that point of the day where it's raining and there's no sun. So
that's right, I need that.
got no electricity.
Yeah, I wanted to just spin in here that when you're talking about the neighborhoods and all that, I would just recognize that is traditional ecological knowledge. The people work together to do those things, to create those orchards that Will's talking about on the Canadian River and all that. That is traditional knowledge. So we're right there. And I think people are so hungry for it.
Ditto. Yeah, ditto. That's like I'm so excited about like my work here at Wildcat. Just like when we get kids, like I mean, we're 50 yards down the trail, and it's like they're different people. I mean, they're engaged and interested and energized. And, well, there's just a lot of hurdles also. So I guess I'm going to ramble a little bit, but we've got like we've grown these like really good relationships, and so there are some organizations, like one is like the school district has like a technological campus or technical campus for like mechanics and HVAC and whatnot, but they also have a horticulture program. And so they have a number of horticulturalist high school students that are looking for projects. And so like, I think like awesome, right? We can put them to work in a whole bunch of different respects. And yet a lot of their education to date has been about like display. And so like putting together like flower arrangements and whatnot. And I mean, I guess that's like, I don't know, that just drives me a little bit nuts, because it like what kind of world do we think that we are entering here? Yeah, it's like teaching kids to work in a slaughterhouse or something. All right. Yeah. What is TEK, or traditional ecologic knowledge, or TEK? And the answer is traditional ecological knowledge. And I would like us to like. So we had a really interesting discussion in our preparatory group about aqueducts. And so like is an aqueduct an example of traditional ecological knowledge-based systems? And I think the answer is like both yes and no, and or it depends. And so I would like us like throughout these series of conversations be thinking about like what are the elements that are necessary for something to be a good example of traditional ecological knowledge. And I suggest that one of them, and perhaps like the most important, is it is enmeshed within place. Like it is locally context specific. Cool. Hey, sorry. Whoop. Yeah, I've already did that one. So, and I've really, I don't know that we need to read this to y'all. I'll let y'all read it for a minute and then let's discuss. I'll just try to make that font smaller too so you can see. Hey, Marie Angel, how are you? I'm glad you can.
Oh,
Join
sorry.
us.
Yes. I
No,
had
you're-
problems with the internet again. That's okay. I'm here. Sorry.
Would you, for the record, as you'd said, give us a short introduction?
Oh, well, quickly, yes. I'm an ecologist, human ecology, particularly lots of experience in semi-arid land. Have worked in Australia and Africa, and now I'm in Brazil, where I'm beginning a project as well. I did the first cohort with Will and Beans of this traditional ecological knowledge and helped create the second one. And yeah, so I'm very sorry to be late, but the internet access is not always very easy, but sorry, I got there. So I can tell you more later on about myself, but I don't want to hold up the meeting. I'm based in the UK. Yeah, I'm based in the UK as well.
Thank you. Yeah, all right. So what here sticks out, and what do you think is important that is missing? Let's just for a few minutes, like what is and isn't traditional ecological knowledge.
You're asking
So-
me?
I'm asking the five of us.
Okay.
And I'll volunteer something. So I get confused and/or am interested in like how this relates to infrastructure. And so there is like one of my favorite types of like ancient water harvesting infrastructure. It's called the Johad, Johad. And these are found in like Rajasthan, India, in a landscape and climate that's very similar to my own. It's pretty arid. And some of them are like 1,000+ years old. It's essentially like just an infiltration pond that captures storm water and lets it sink into the ground. And so is is the infrastructure an example, or rather like what, just like how do we separate the two, or is it even worth separating the two? I really like the framing of infrastructure because we can talk about, like elements and placement and software to run and perpetuate and maintain. It seems a little less theoretical to my mind than traditional ecological knowledge.
I don't understand what you mean by infrastructure.
That's so like structures really like between structures or like that enable a society to function. And so I would suggest like one of our dialogues is going to look at the Qanat or Qanat, Qanat. And this is a horizontal well that is, I suppose, passive in a sense. Like it's not artificial pumping. It doesn't require energy. And it is sustainable in the sense that whenever the water goes down, it stops producing water. It only produces water if there is sufficient water. So the Quinat is infrastructure that really drives the evolution of the downstream society. And so like the placement of churches and homes and farms and baths are all made in relation to in relation to the Quinat, which delivers clean water and cold air. And so that is an example where I think it is both effective infrastructure and an example of traditional ecological knowledge because it is focused on place. But, and it can be used as a tool of political control. And so I think that's like what I'm hoping to uncover by distinguishing traditional ecologic knowledge from successful ancient infrastructure. It is that the TEK is like whether or not it is a good example that we want to learn from. Is it something that empowers the people that live within the place? Or is it something that empowers a hierarchy to control the place? And I think infrastructure can do either one. Yeah, and I guess another question that's begged is like, who is in charge? Are they here, or is it an empire somewhere?
Right. Well,
Please.
I mean, well, I just feels to me, and actually I was in a breakout group with Claire Atwell yesterday, who, as you may recognize, she's been deeply involved with the Salish Sea work, the bioregional work and all that. And she was just, they've been working at scale more so than, in the smaller communities. And as we conversed, it just, to me, what emerged was very much that sense of, well, we need this vision. So like you're talking about these larger infrastructure types of things. And we know, in a perfect world, some, beautiful beings would develop all of that for us and it would all be very organized. And yet, Beans, I'm not going to lose that vision that you gave us of, it's like we're on a sinking ship and we're just, developing the life rafts. And it just feels like, just as, Jude mentioned, the way that we are looking at everything is that, and I hate to use the word love, in some sense, because it has been so lost in the shuffle and misused and all of that. But even as I was out there planting last weekend, these little seedlings in the ground, how important it was to put the human love into it, to put that caring. We know plants respond to that, and plants communicate with one another. And so it just feels like we can talk about infrastructure and bigger vision, and it's very important to do that to some degree. But right now, we got to get on the ground. And I shouldn't even say but. I think the most important thing is to rebuild communities. Because when you think of the indigenous peoples, they didn't necessarily cooperate and get along. The tribes would, have their issues. But the more we know so much more about the power of the human heart with the Heart Math Institute's work and everything. And the more we can activate that. And that's this favorite Teilhard quote that Jude and I quote, that instead of someday, but now, we need to engage the energies of love for higher purpose. And Teilhard said, on that day, we will have rediscovered fire. The real life force energy will be revitalized by that. And I think that only happens begins in community, in close communities.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yes.
mm,
Please.
yeah. There are always all the elements in the human society of the heart, the head, the hand. That's how the human ecology center that where I worked with termed it, head, heart, hand. I think Will's question was about much more how does it occur? How do we arrive at it? And is it right to call it infrastructure in that sense? I think it is. I think it is. Because structure means that something has been built all the time. Infra it's been built through time, space, processes. The thing about this, we talked about before we prepared about this comparative list, yeah, that Western science was also called elsewhere academic ecological knowledge. I think it's the next slide. And these distinctions are correct, but they are also narrative, yeah, academic ecological knowledge. But we also laughed because technical, it's got the same sound to it, TECH or TEK. And you, I think it was you, Annie, in our breakaway group at the guild meeting, who said definition of tech is to get something done. Something is made, yeah? And to make something, you need all three, yeah. The question, which also Will just brought up, comes as to, it's a question of power. The power for or the power over. That's another thing we study in human ecology, 3 forms of power: power for, power with, power over. It's 3 different ways of looking at how power acts. So I remember that I pointed out that in that whole series of examples we are going to see that we chose, some of the examples seem to have been evolved much more by a community in a place, and then some of these would have been picked up by higher organizations, like the Persian one, the Qanats, huge tunnel systems, etc. So there you need a lot more power, right? So you need a hierarchy, you need some sort of organization. It's an empire, it conquered tons of territory, etc. However, what was striking about also about these different stories we're going to see that some of these techniques continued and some of them disappeared. Some of them were taken over by an empire and destroyed by an empire, and others continued in spite of an empire and all that. So I think that's going to be a discussion that is going to be interesting to determine. I mean, it's also the discussion of our time. You know, we live within empire systems that now date back 4,000 years, and we complain about their effect, all these effects of Western science a lot. But at the same time, we don't know how to get back to the original tech. And when you look at these 2 lists, it's not that distinct because a lot of these old texts, like the Sumerian one, etc., that came out after written tradition came, and some of it was written down, or you know, it's not that separated, those 2. They have elements of each other. That's all I wanted to say there. They have elements of each other.
That is, I kind of get that too. Whenever I see this table, is like, I like placing the 2 in context and looking at the differences, but this isn't like always the case or always true. It's just whenever we're looking at like a segment of knowledge, I think we can kind of use these as a tool of classification. Does it exist within like an objective scientific journal context, or does it arise out of this long cultural heritage tradition? That kind of thing, to the extent that it is important. And that is something that, like, I'm really glad that Annie made this comment. And I do, like, I know that sometimes, like, I err in the sense of, you know, like, let's talk about the thing and let's not talk about like the people. And so there is this really important, like, you know, caveat, like if we're going out and doing the work, to what degree is it useful to think strategically and whatnot, versus to engage in like loving acts and to spread and share the love. And I think, like, you know, kind of they're both essential. And it just takes lots of people ultimately. And you're right, Beans. It did change the font.
another element that comes in my mind is the element of scale, and particularly I'm thinking of human population scale. You know, because as the Western science grew from 200 years ago, the human population numbers have grown exponentially. We all know that curve, the famous curve of population. So that there are all kinds of emergent properties that come from that about how you handle knowledge, amount of infrastructure needed to supply food, to organize that number of people, to etc. You know, I mean, so that a lot of these traditional examples are from time much before all that occurred, right? That's just want to bring this up.
And
Much
on a
more.
totally unrelated, purely vain, egotistical note from my point, all of these fonts should be better, but they got changed in the slides when I saved them. So it makes me sad reading these slides right now because they're so.
Oh,
It's so. Look at how this is such a boring font. It makes me want to fall asleep. Anyway, all right, that has nothing to do with anything. It just. It's not my original intentions for it to be this boring looking. I'm a little more creative than using the most basic font ever. So I'm going to shut up now.
Beautiful, like the slides
There's-
are. So we'll figure that out.
Right.
And get those shared. So yeah, some like kind of to wind things up in an anticipation of our future session. Like these are some examples of the systems that we're going to be looking at. And yeah, so we mentioned the Quinault before, this horizontal well system. And if we want to break it down into elements, we have like an infiltration gallery up here where like your tunnel, you want it to be porous and permeable to allow water to soak in. And then you have like a transportation aqueduct or a conveyance here where it is impermeable because you don't want the water to soak back into the ground. And then it's delivered to the surface. And whenever we look at some of the examples later on, it is like you have, again, different structures that are built in relation and proximity to the Quinault. Then from the American Southwest, we have the example of waffle gardens. And it was really kind of sad looking at some of the old pictures because they're taken of these people that are essentially, I guess, refugees. Like they've been removed, they've been placed upon this nominal, marginal property and essentially like consigned to a subsistence type of life. And then they go in and they build these waffle gardens. And so there's a lot of like beauty and just kind of universal lessons in these systems that we'll get into. And then we're going to do some of these as demonstration systems here at Wildcat. We're going to install them over the winter, and I'm pretty pumped about that. Another system that, like, one of my favorites is the Chinampas, and these come out of Lake Tenochtitlan, like Old Mexico. And of course, the conquistadors didn't recognize, like they didn't recognize them for what they were. And one of the first things that the empire did was like drain the swamp, which kind of disrupted this whole system. But just absolutely gorgeous. And I think that there's a lot of lessons applicable to the playa lands, like the playa wetlands that dot the high plains. Because again, as we like discuss these, I want you all to be thinking about like how does this apply to my place, please? Cool. Yeah, and more, cool season fire to maintain a forest, coppicing, which has like huge provisional benefits. Acequias, there's a fantastic network of acequias in New Mexico. They've been choked by floods following fire. And so, and then there's a Congress of acequia keepers that has been in existence longer than the New Mexico State Congress and the United States federal government. And it is a continuing body. Like this Congress continues to exist, but it is incredibly endangered, which is the case with most of the systems that we're looking at. And that, I think, is kind of like the culmination of this course. And then it's like, why are these things disappearing? And how can we re-enliven these and build our own examples?
Right.
Cool. And yeah, we got a minute to discuss or something.
There's something that occurs to me, this expression, necessity is the mother of invention. You know the expression, right? And a lot of this disappearance stuff may have to do with that. You know, when you can distribute food over vast distances, well, the necessity to feed yourself disappears. Why did the Spanish destroy so many of these systems when they arrived in South America? Well, they didn't think they needed them, right? But they didn't realize what they were doing. And then afterwards, in fact, in the slide about the Nampas, they talk about the fact that they had to redo it themselves in a different way. And they didn't have all the knowledge because they hadn't been living there for thousands of years, hundreds of years, etc. So that's interesting.
Cool. So yeah, like I think that we have kind of covered a lot. I was hoping to cover more, but I think that that was a little bit naive. And so next in 2 weeks, that Wednesday, we're gonna do, I mean, it's gonna be like a crash course review of these systems within the context of a landscape. And I think, or I intend to start like kind of start high and work our way down, right? So like way up high, we can like, you know, the kind of artificial glacier type stuff, you know, and then just come down from there. And one of the next ones down is probably my favorite, the Mamanteos, which is kind of Spanish for like, I guess, like a mother's titties, or the Amunia, which I don't really know, but they're referring to the same thing. And it's, well, they're awesome. It's like divert water up high on a slope, convey it across the ridge line so it soaks into the slope, and then 6 months later it discharges as spring water at the base of the slope, so you're sustained through the dry season. And it's just like a fantastic example. And anyway, we'll just continue to work our way down, and so we will also advertise that a bit in hopes of getting a few more folk. Cool.
The
Thank y'all for
Amuna,
being
the
here.
Amuna versus Mamanteus. Could not find anything about Mamanteus online. It brought up some inappropriate results on Google. So Amuna was consistent with finding all of the same information about the Mamanteus stuff. So I didn't add any of that into today's slide. Some mystery for the future.
Yeah, and also to add that Will's decision, I mean, with proposal to go from top to bottom, the obvious reason is that water goes downhill. Water goes downhill, and the whole idea of all these systems is slow it down, keep it there, doing anything you can for having it all year round, and avoid using it to evaporation, or it goes into the sea and becomes salty. Yeah?
So like I used to kind of start my preaching by talking about the water budget, and so like we had these elements, we have precipitation, we have runoff, and P plus runoff should equal evaporation, transpiration, etc. And it wasn't an effective way of narration. And so yeah, like I really like the storying tie-in. And so like it's still useful to look at these systems, with a consideration of the water budget, like how does this like change the numbers? But I think kind of the point is that like we need to engage in place-based, context-driven storying as much or more than we need to talk about the numbers in an objective sense. Cool.
Right.
Please, you.
If I may say, it's all very interesting, and different things that have been said brings to mind that there's a question of scale. At what scale are we talking? There's a question of people. Like, for example, Annie is on 1.5 acres in outside of Austin. It is dry. So what can be done to sort of revitalize that ecology? She mentioned there used to be a SEEP spot where it tended to be wet over some time. So there's the space and the people or the person, and then we know we cannot develop, we cannot improve in isolation, because more and more we are seeing that we are all interconnected. So there's no point in just developing a little oasis on an acre and a half and not sensitizing the neighbors. So then we get to, like reach out in terms of neighborhood. So reach out to other people. And there's also this dynamic that we've started in terms of trying to develop some action within a community, an existing community. Like we happen to have had this contact at Trinity by the Sea Episcopalian Church, where there's facilities, including a new outdoor amphitheater that people can actually meet and have these meetings, So it's really a question of scale and people. Now, will or even beings, like you're talking of, hundreds of acres, that's a different scale again. And these different approaches to water retention and water use that you put up is very interesting. So bottom line, it's really, we need to be mindful of the space. Which space are we talking about and who is involved? In the long run, we want to involve as many people. It doesn't matter if they're living on 100-acre ranches. Neighbors ought to know about each other and adopt better practices for the long term. So that's how I'm situating myself in this big picture that I'm privileged to be part of. Thank you very much.
Yes, there's one more element that I see is the practices themselves, the craft, the the know-how, the how you do it thing. Place people, necessity and all that. And then the tradition is the handing down. I was just looking at definitions, handing down of statements, beliefs, legends, customs, information from generation to generation, especially by word of mouth or by practice. So in that sense, we're still doing that. That's what I was asking myself. Aren't we still doing traditions? Well, we're still doing that, but now we've mediated it a lot through professionals and organizations of all kinds and school, universal schooling, all that stuff. Through these big empire systems that develop, which I think has a lot to do, again, with scale, just like Jude was just saying. Scale changes everything. And because of that, we're going to have to use both. That's all. Yeah. It's just that one mustn't dominate the other or have contempt for the other, like the Spanish did. I mean, I was really struck again. I'm going to repeat it. Every slide that we're going to see where the Spanish arrived, they destroy everything before they even look at it. That's very striking. That's contempt.
I just want to say we should have contempt for all these corporations that are doing us dirty. Us as smaller people, as communities, we should feel anger towards these people that have been doing us wrong. I mean, without the anger, there's very little motivating people other than fear. And fear, I don't know, it's a sort of motivator, but right now there's not enough of it, and I don't want there to have to be enough of it. So for me, the only emotion I think I can try to, other than hope, but I mean, I don't know about that. I don't think it's a strong enough emotion. I think we need to harness the anger of the community towards like Annie and Jude working against like the ammonia plant, right? Like that's a community thing. There are angry people at those meetings, right? That's what's bringing them there because of the injustice that these corporations are bringing and the contempt that we feel towards them. So I think like we should remember that we should feel contempt through these people that are doing us wrong. And sure, I don't feel contempt towards any of you guys. You're all amazing. And remember, our neighbors are influenced by the propaganda like all of us are, right? Like the constant onslaught of propaganda we get every day. And we might be privileged enough to recognize that, but the other people that are still living in the fog of that stuff and maybe not as aware of we are, But yeah, in general, I don't want to feel contempt, but I feel a lot of contempt towards a lot of these people.
Yeah. Well, if I may just add, one point I miss is watershed awareness. Like people generally are are not aware of watersheds. Water has been coming through pipes and whatnot. So there's a need to develop watershed awareness in this bioregional dynamic. Now, the last point that was mentioned is, what's the energy? You know, like we, with Annie and some of the other people in the coastal band of Texas there, and I've been very impressed with that, this attitude that we are not seeking to be adversarial. We want to recognize the other person on the other side as a person, someone who also has children who may be concerned. So we have to appeal to that. And the first meeting of TCEQ that Annie attended, and I had the privilege of being there, I mean, she just gave her lineage. I mean, three generation Texan, father having, you know, was 995, concerned about the future and all that. So, and in this last meeting this week where she attended, you have it happens that the TCEQ president was mingling. And then, you know, he comes and talk as a person saying, I agree with you. My hands are a bit tied on the commission because the laws, the way they set up. So you need to get in touch with your representative, you know, so to get the politicians a bit more aware. So you see, like, people are well-intentioned, and I think especially the way things are going, both in terms of climate, in terms of inequities and social upheavals all over. I think we have to really touch this moral fiber, you know, this care for future generation, you know. So, yeah.
Yes, and yeah, you're right there that everybody shares that. That's the important thing. And when you can touch and connect with that, then you can have this falling away of a lot of conditioning, which was set out by the empire system to disempower us, so that we would fight with one another and not come together, not pass on traditional knowledge, not even trust our own observation. You're right. People don't know the cycle of water because ecology is not taught at school. Is not taught at school. It's not taught in primary. It's not taught in the secondary. Yeah. It only begins to be taught in university. And maybe it's beginning to change in some places. I do think it is, but I became a home educator because of that, because I didn't want my daughter to be so conditioned that it would take her a number of years to shed all these wrong notions that she would pick up from school and then not be able to connect. And yeah, the whole connect thing, which I'm just reading this book. I'll just show it to you now. I just began to read it. Somebody from the school told me about this, the ecology of care, and the ecology of care, D.D. Pershing. And she talks about the fact that her grandfather and her great-grandfather were involved in like lobotomy and using radiation for cancer and all that. And she had to unlearn all that. That she was like being trained early on. She was working with like doves. You know, they were having their brain operated on without anesthetic or anything. They were kept in tiny little cages. And reductionist science thought that they were able to understand something about the functioning of the brain of a dog who was in a tiny little cage, who never flew as a flock, who was not going in the natural environment. And yet they thought they were learning something about how the brain works. And she had to like unlearn all that, become an acupuncturist, then be forced by her economic conditions to like have to have her acupuncture little consultation room in her own house. And then she realized that it enabled her to help people by telling them what they should eat. And then she realized, you know, all kinds of other advantages of that. And then finally, after decades, she came to the conclusion that our big problem is this divorce. It's non-connection between, in this case, she investigates a non-connection of medicine and agriculture, but particularly that, but it applies everywhere. So that, coming back to TEK, that's where the tradition is destroyed and the ecological understanding that comes from necessity, from living in your place, from having to grow your own food, from connecting with your community, by being in your community, also disappears, and therefore the knowledge disappears too. And then you force through school in order to arrive at the place after like decades of studies where you're going to be allowed to say something that has weight and authority, that people are going to listen to you. I have that experience all the time. I worked as a auxiliary nurse in hospital, and I tried to make so many changes, and every time it's like, who are you? You're just an HEA. The consultant can say something. You can't say nothing because you know nothing.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much. I will share like an updated syllabus in the Mighty Network, and we've created a folder, so these presentations will be there and some additional materials, and we will make sure that the font gets prettied up also. It's a pleasure to meet you, Jude, and everybody else. Thank you all. It's nice to see you.
Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you.